It's an honor to be here. I'm going to make a couple of generic remarks about history, and this is the part of my presentation where I read the slide. I apologize. I'm going to talk about how I came to notice what was in the woods around here, and Acton plays a very central role in this story. I live in Concord, but to some extent the good stuff's over here, and it didn't take long to find out about that. And then I'm afraid I'm going to force you people to listen to something technical. There's different reasons why. I'm going to be talking about rock stone structures in the woods. And there are different reasons why you might be interested in them, ranging from the technical scientific to the spiritual. I'm going to subject you to some technical details of the subject. There's lots of different things you could talk about. I picked some of them, but I'm not talking about everything that I could. Then I'd like to go outside of Acton and then come back to Acton later. Most of the talk, I hope, will be about Acton. And let's see how my connectivity works. First section, noticing rock piles in the woods. So several years ago, maybe 20 years ago, I was exposed to a book called Manitou by someone called James Mavor and Byron Dix. And in this book, which I strongly recommend you look at if this is of any interest, they talk about how the Native Americans built stone walls, built perhaps stone chambers, standing stones, stone mounds, a lot of things. And this came as a complete surprise to me and my father, who we thought the farmers built everything that's to be seen in New England. So we went out and checked some of Mavor's statements, and we happened to live in the same town that he did, and he talked about some stone walls by a certain place. We went and looked, and yeah, sure enough, it did in fact, stone wall did in fact point towards the solstice, which suggested that, you know, maybe there actually is something to this topic of unusual, not colonial farm or originated stone materials, stuff, man-made stuff in the woods. Maybe there's something there. So I was wandering around, and I was just totally admiring of Mavor and Dix, and how could they bring such great ideas to be? I wish I could contribute something to this subject. And I'm taking walks in Acton, and I'm noticing, you know, some interesting rock piles and stuff, but I don't know anything about it. You know, you just see something like this, and you think about it. You don't look at it too carefully. You just walk by it. You know, you walk by it because it looks like a little teeny piece of stone wall, and we're all conditioned to ignore stone walls because there's what's to look at. And let's see what my next picture is. Yeah, and you see little things like this. It's not really a stone wall. So you notice it, but you don't think much of it. Until one day, I happened up to the top of the field at Weatherby Avenue. Does everyone know where Weatherby Avenue is here? It's a conservation land off of Route 2. And it's a field, a cornfield. And at the top of the field, if you poke your nose into the woods, you see big piles of rocks, and they're messy. And I tried to conduct an experiment with this pile of rocks. You see the little blue X's on each rock? By myself, I tried to measure the width of every rock so I could form a distribution of widths, because I was convinced that that was not the same distribution of sizes as I had just finished seeing over here. Those rocks are all the same size, pretty much, and they're this big. These rocks are every which way, and they've just been tossed together. And this is, in fact, what a cleared field rock pile looks like. And it's very easy to identify. It's at the edge of a field. It'll have big rocks and little rocks, and it will be just no structure. And so I was thinking, that's not at all what I was looking at. That's not at all the same thing as that. Something's to look at. So I started paying closer attention to rock piles. And some of these don't come out too well, but can you see that that's a big crescent-shaped mound? This, by the way, is Neshoba Brook. You go across the Wheeler Lane, you go across the river, across the brook. Instead of turning right, you turn left. Go up to the brow of the hill and walk along, you'll come across this. So I started realizing that it's not just one thing that's different from field clearing. It's a whole variety of different things that are different from field clearing. Taking me, I think I skipped a step. This is not what I expected, but how could anybody imagine that that's from some sort of farmer disposing of rocks? It's a deliberate, carefully built thing And you'd have to be out of your mind to think that this was random discarding of rock. Look at that.
Where is that?
Queens Fort, Rhode Island. I apologize. I'm trying to stay in Acton, but really some of the best piles that illustrate what I'm saying are not in Acton. So, yeah, well, so I did a little bit of that. And I love this thing. It's just the weirdest structure. This is in Bolton, right next to Corn Road, up in the woods. Look at that. That's not a stone wall. And it's very carefully built. And these aren't glacial till. This is broken rock. This is bedrock. Somebody extracted this rock deliberately, then built these things for some unknown reason. So, let's see where.
Could be a home with wood on top of it, right?
What?
Could be a home with that wood on top of it.
It's not a good picture, but no. These little rock piles are just in parallel lines like this. They're staged and you couldn't put a house there. So, why did I skip a step? Oh, okay. So, over time, I looked around more and more in the woods. I started exploring further and further from Acton, and I realized that it wasn't just little piles of rocks that had nice structure, or big berms or strange structures, that there's really a wide variety of things you can see out there. And I'm just going to list some of them, but I'm not going to talk about them. One of them is a split rock that has a wedge put way down deep inside of it, and you may consider that as a casual act. Somebody tossed a rock into a crack. But you will find examples where there's 2 tons of rock had been lifted up to get that thing underneath there. So if you see a split rock, look for the wedge inside. It's a very common thing, especially near springs. Prayer seats, little things that are shaped like a U, just about big enough to sit in. They're really very common. They look like fireplaces, except that they're open on one side and there's no charring on the inside. No evidence of a fire. Boulders are frequently propped up. People used levers and put things up. It must have been an impressive thing to move a rock. And there are also, I believe, effigies, which are representative, show pictures of things built out of rocks. Don't want to talk about those today either. I'm going to talk instead about grids, because what I noticed really that was most interesting about the rock piles at Spring Hill, over here in Acton, it's one of your conservation lands, was that they were kind of like in lines with even spacing between them. And it wasn't just a single line of rock piles. It was a whole grid of them. And it's almost impossible to photograph these things. There's underbrush and one reason or another. So these are really just to give you the sense that I tried to take a picture of it. But you can perhaps get a sense that the distance from here to here is comparable to the distance from here to here. Maybe it's a little bit wider. Maybe there was an extra feature there. And then if you look in the background, you'll see there's other piles there, and that this line is paralleled by another line that's offset behind it. It doesn't do any, it's not any better in the snow. It's just pretty. So I thought it would be fun to try to survey that. Where were the rock piles? And I went out by hand and I drew a picture, and it was kind of subjective and not really valid as a picture. And then we went out with a transit for surveying and did a more careful survey of the piles. But even that wasn't very accurate, because when I took the survey that we did, this is by Lisa Grashow and Bob Morton, if any of you know those names, I could stand at the rock piles and see a whole line, but on the survey they'd be like off the line because we were never sure where the middle of the pile was. It was just being sloppy, so I corrected it a little bit. And the following is subjective, but based on a real survey. My first attempt to plot the locations of those piles. And in a little while, we'll look at a really careful survey of this. And this one's not that far off from it. The trail goes up from Spring Hill Road, and these things turn out to be exercise stations. Somebody had a little jogging thing, and this is where you do this exercise. So there's features there that are modern. But there's also 30 rock piles, and they're not scattered around at random. The impression that they're in lines, you could go take a look. It's really true. And if you are diligent about it, you'll find that there's cross relationships between them. Not only are the lines going this way, there's lines going that way. What the heck does it all mean? I'm actually in a position to answer that question tonight, if I can get to it. Video here. All right, this is where I You have to forgive me. I'm going to try multimediaing. Here we go. Now, I think we're going to watch this a couple times because the audio quality may not be any good and it may not be too visible, but this is Fred Martin's survey. We're going to look at a video where Fred Martin's survey of the Acton grid is one piece of paper, and the other piece of paper is something that was produced by Dick Davis and Carlisle called the stupid sheet. Stupid sheet shows a compass with various astronomical directions of interest, like a solstice or an equinox or the first time in the year that the Pleiades come over the horizon. That's that direction where they come up. So I'm going to combine two pieces of paper that were not built with each other in mind. And let's hear the audio. Probably won't be any good.
This is a survey.
This is a survey
That sort of grid.
of that sort of grid in Acton.
And
And
went back to see if
I went back to see if any of the lines converged anywhere.
on a high point.
And they did. Not at the high point, but right next to the high point.
Next to the high point.
Here is Carlisle's stupid sheet.
Sheet.
It's on transparent paper.
Put it down.
We're just going to put it down so that it lines up with north vertical. Wait a minute, it's upside down. Sorry. Turn it right side up. We're gonna line it down right because we're gonna line it up with the paper, and we're gonna put that center on top of where the lines converge. And come on, back up here. Yeah, which is what I'm just trying to do. Oh, it's hard to see.
Those rock piles are right along there.
Oh, it's out of focus. When you put it down there, those rock piles
Summer solstice, sunset.
are right up along that line. Is that intelligible at all, what I'm showing you? In other words, without desiring to prove this, the experiment is happening before your eyes. We're taking a compass direction that ran and placing it on top of a survey without any knowledge of the one of the other. And the lines in one picture match the lines in the other, and that's a solstice direction, which is proof as much as I need to believe that I think we should go back to this. Want to see it again?
Yeah.
Okay, without so much talk. This is a survey. So I'm going to put the center of the compass down on that spot,
See if any of those lines converge.
which is next to the big rock up there, if you know the place. It's not on the rock, it's next to the rock. And I'm going to take that compass and put it down here, and one of the lines in that chart, well,
Stupid sheet. On transparent paper.
it's a stupid sheet because you can be stupid and still use it. And I am about this stuff. You still derive some virtue from it. So anyway, so the center of it's going to go down there. I wish it was better focused. Maybe it's easier to see in the distance. Yeah, so you put it down right on top of the intersection. And look what happens. Those rock piles are deliberately created along the line of a solstice. And I would ask you to, what he says in the video here is that some of the other lines do too. So
There. Parallel.
yeah, some of these other lines match up, some whatever, it's too hard to see that. Okay, I'm going to stop this now and try to go back to this. And for just a second, let's go back and, come on, resume slideshow. Sorry, I'm trying to go full screen here. Resume slideshow. Well, I can click around for a while. What? Click on what?
12 to the 11th line.
Click on this guy.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to just go to here.
That's where you are.
Okay. That's not the point. The point is I want to get to here, and then I want to go full screen, which is supposed to happen with PowerPoint when you click there. Well, never matter. Never mind, I'll just see what I can do. But, all right, so this is the solstice line. These three lines not done correctly in this survey. They converge over here to a point, which means that these other lines here are slightly other dates in the year that were of some importance. And also, these lines match up with something else on the stupid sheet, which I can't show you. So this is a calendar, is what that is. Okay? I believe I'm making a statement. I guess it's premature to think that I've made my case here. I'm not really trying to make a case. I forgot to make the remarks about history that I was going to start with. So let me correct that mistake. History is not really intended to be proved. You either remember it because it happened yesterday, or you heard about it from a source that you believe that you don't question, or perhaps it's from further back and you didn't even hear about it, and you don't question it, and you don't know about it, and it didn't happen. But to try to prove that something happened historically is a little bit weird, because history is not a fact in some sense. The only thing that's factual is the present. So if I asked you, and I'm going to be exaggerating here, prove to me that the Statue of Liberty was given to America by the French. Prove it. Were you there? No. Well, there are records. Do you believe the records? Sure. What if there were no records? Well, you could saw off a little piece of the bronze and try to do a material, but it gets pretty hard. Try to prove that an arrowhead is man-made to someone who's never seen an arrowhead, thinks it's a rock. There are a lot of people in the world, you show them an arrowhead, you go, it's just a rock. How do you know that that's an arrowhead? How do you know that the Statue of Liberty was given by the French? You don't know, you just believe. It's self-evident. There's no reason to question it. And so I don't really want to try to prove anything to you tonight. It's just that I've tried thinking about what I'm looking at from different points of view, and I've settled on the belief that there was a culture that was here and that remains here that built things that are outside of the European tradition. And I don't want to forget to make a couple of these initial remarks, so please forgive me. I read something the other day where the person said, yeah, rock piles, you know, the myth of the Indian graveyard, it's a lot of fun, but let's be practical. We all know that since the Industrial Revolution, farmers have cleared their fields and this, and I'm getting more and more angry at this person writing about the myth of the Indian graveyard. I want to say, that sounds kind of racist. You mean you don't think that Indians died? Or you don't think that they disposed of their dead? Or you don't think that it left any trace? Or you don't think that all those people who talked about Indian graveyards in the past, you think that that was all just talk? And it's like, it was sort of upsetting to me, because the true myth is that, and here's a myth that's correct and believed, Indians don't exist. That's the myth. Indians don't exist. Fact is, they do exist. They live here today. I don't know if there's any in the audience. And they have continued to use the woods for non-Christian purposes. In the present, in the recent present, in the historic present, and in the recent past, and in the past, and in the deeper past. There's been no time at which Christianity erased the Indians. Although it was extremely important for the land acquisition philosophies of the colonial farmers to deny the existence of the Indians, and it became ingrained into our culture that they don't exist. It's just not true. They do exist. And it's racist to think that they don't exist. And here's an important point, is that this grid here, there is nothing like that in Europe, with one exception. But the exception is in prehistoric Europe. There's something like that. The fan at Gros Medoc, isn't it? The Mesolithic fan. There's nothing like these rock piles in Europe, except in prehistory in Europe. And so when people say, oh yeah, farmers have always cleared their fields, like, no, they didn't, because we got sites and structures here. There's nothing like them in Europe. If it's such a European concept, show me one place in Europe where it happened. There are places in Europe where, like Corsica, they had to build careful rock piles because they didn't have enough land, and they needed to get the rocks out of the way and do a good job with it. And those are of interest, and they're also prehistoric, actually. So where are we? You know, this really doesn't work. I'm trying to go full screen. Does anybody have any suggestions as to how to go full screen?
That 41% right next to your clicker,
Ah,
I don't know if that's going to help you. You see that? You see begins there?
no, it didn't help.
So,
This thing is supposed to go full screen.
you minimize.
I can't hide anything. I
What if
don't.
you click resume slideshow?
You did.
I did.
Now click on that projector at the bottom. Yeah. Now it's over to slideshow.
Slideshow, add or remove buttons. How about if I close that? Does that make a difference? All right, I'm going to have to proceed. Yeah, it's not as nice and visible. Anyway, so continuing from the video, now we're looking at a different grid. I don't know how visible that is to you. This one's over on the other side of Spring Hill at Neshoba Brook, and the Acton land stewards have been doing a thing called the Trail Through Time and clearing this out and doing a great job making it visible. And they surveyed there, and this is the grid that they came up with. And you can see it's not a great grid, but it does have evenly spaced things in parallel lines. So it has some similarity to it. And that's about as grid as you're going to get. It's not really a grid, but it's very likely a calendar with the same function as the one that's a mile away to the south. There are grids everywhere. I don't know if you can see this one. For example, there's 3 things in a row there. This goes off that way. This one's at the end of Gates Lane in Stowe. A very easy walk. You can park your car, take 10 steps, and look to the left. Stowe, Gates Lane. Go to the end of the lane, take 3 steps forward, look to the left. You'll see an amazing collection of rock piles, which I also tried to survey. And this one's really a rather complicated set of arrangement of these things, and it's very much like the one in Acton. I know this is dry, but that's what I wanted to talk about. I want to illustrate that these sites are extremely common. This is, Peter, have you gone to that EMC place in Hopkinton, Gilmore Road, and the top of the hill? There's an airstrip, top of the hill, and on the far side of the airstrip, an incredible collection of these rock piles that are all over the place. I think they form a grid. Here's one at the Nemba, Vietnam trail bike area in, what town is that?
Hopkinton, Milford, Holliston.
Hopkinton, Milford, Holliston. One of the features that you can't quite make out here is there's a trail going up through that. A lot of times you get a feeling that perhaps walking through these places serves some function because there will be a beaten path through it, and you need to keep your eyes out for beaten paths. Just a primitive preliminary stone wall. It's not because the rock piles are going in every direction, not just the one that I'm pointing the camera along.
Burr and Harvard, is that?
Okay, so there's a horse farm, and there's a Sherry Road. Let's see. You know where Route 111 goes west from 495? There's 495. You go west, and you go up a hill, and there's a horse farm on your right. Okay, behind the horse farm. There's a little side road that goes along there with a very inconspicuous trailhead there in Harvard. You go down to the bottom of the field, cross the brook, follow the trail, and you will see on your right the beginning of this place. It's extensive.
I'm sorry, could you say that? That's I live there.
All right. Behind the horse farm, I can't remember the name of the road, but so there's the ridge, right? And you've been going up Route 111, and then the horse farm is here.
Yeah.
And there's a road that goes along the back side there. I don't remember what it's called.
There's a little road that turns off 111 and goes up.
There's 2 roads, actually. So you take a right on 111. One of them is Sherry Road. It goes down into to Cisco. The other is up and around the horse farm.
Right. Yeah.
And about 100 yards past the cleared part of the farm, there's a little inconspicuous trailhead.
Oh my goodness.
Okay, go down there, go to the bottom of the field, cross the brook, and keep your eyes open. there's a hill there, a little knob. And the rock piles are nonstop from there down to Cisco. I'm exaggerating, but it's that whole area is full of things.
Yeah, because I was just in this area, yeah, I think it's off Sherry Road, but right behind Cisco, there was another area that had all kinds of amazing rock.
The talk is going to continue now without pictures in the next section. I'm getting used to this. So the next part of my talk I was going to tell you about, so I've tried to tell you about grids. They're everywhere. It's the most common kind of rock pile site in our area are grids. Okay? Chick, I just lost audio visual. What happened?
Backing up the right tree. Power cycle everything.
Yeah, it's power cycling itself. Anyway, so what I was about to do was to say, let's look outside of Acton. There's many interesting things in Acton, but let's start at the biggest picture. Let's look at the United States, at where one can find rock pile sites. Because it's only in New England, really, that we don't know about this stuff. Okay? So please bear with me. I'm looking at I guess we should all look at it in the same direction. Massachusetts is over here. There's a place in Canada called Bannock Point. It's famous for the effigies that are built in rock on the bedrock surfaces there. Does anyone? Okay, if you wanted to, you could look up Bannock Point. The Indians who live there today don't know who built those things. They just say the old ones built them. It may be associated with, well, anyway, so there's Bannock Point's a famous place. If you go down south, there's a famous place called Eagle Mound, which is a stone pile shaped like an eagle covered with quartz. And it's a beautiful thing. I'd love to go visit it someday. Apparently in Georgia, there are so many rock piles everywhere that the only other people that contact me are always from Georgia, because there's rock piles everywhere in Georgia, apparently. And so there's another place called Track Rock, which is famous for some petroglyphs and for a huge complex of, they call them cairns, rock piles down there. And the people say there's an awful lot of similarity between that and the Maya. And these terraces and terracings that they see in Georgia remind them of Mayan stuff. Now, this is not a polite thing for anybody to want to think about, but that's what they say. And my point is simply that there's a lot of rock piles in Georgia. And if I continue to look at the map here, come a little bit closer to home, in Pennsylvania there's a famous place called the Ole Hills site. And this is basically considered to be the edges of the mound builder territory. And in those parts of the world where mounds are acknowledged and are okay to talk about, the Indian stone structures, which might be smaller than big mounds, are believed to be part of that kind of thing, stuff left behind by the Indians. Nobody's really sure about when and where or exactly how, but it's not so controversial a topic in other parts of America. Closer to home, there's a place in Rhode Island called Killingsworth, where they had a big fight with the developers, and they used this as a reason to not bulldoze everything. Another one there, North Smithfield, Rhode Island, was big in the newspaper recently about some sort of person who was pursuing the same ideas as I'm talking about tonight, but with fake academic credentials, got in there and made a mess. And big lawsuits and big interesting stories that distract from the reality, which is that there were important battles that took place down at Nipsachuk, it's called. And it's believed that the rock piles there are memorials to those events. And one typical explanation for rock piles is that they're donations that memorialize an event. And that is actually accepted by the archaeological community, that there is such a thing as a donation pile, where you add a rock. In fact, that's probably accepted because everywhere in the world they do that. Everywhere. So it's okay if we do it here too. But there's a famous thing in Stockbridge, Massachusetts called Monument Mountain, where they have one big rock pile that's been moved. But it was an example of a memorial pile. I don't believe that the grids are necessarily memorial piles. They're much too carefully built. Memorials tend to have no particular shape, and the only reason they are where they are is because that's where something happened. Which is another way of saying, this is not there, it's not important. You don't have to think about it. Don't look at what it looks like.
You're back.
I'm back. Amazing. Amazing. So we were here, and then that's Parker Woodland in Rhode Island. And I'm guessing it's got more rock piles per square inch than any place else. So, Peter, have you been there?
Yeah, it's got a lot of.
I mean, you can just tell from this picture that I stole from somebody that, I mean, that's an impressive structure. It's obviously it's been rebuilt. This is right next to the trail. But these other ones, they're still, they haven't completely fallen down. Have you ever seen anything like that?
Seen something in Holliston just like the one in the foreground. I recently posted that to my blog. You inspired me to blog myself, actually. So should be on my one of the newer posts on my blog.
I'll go take a look. It's really a rhetorical question to see. I mean, I'm glad you answered.
Okay.
But my point is that if you never saw one of these things and somebody was telling you about it, you go, what are you talking about? These are stone walls. No, it's not stone walls. And if you haven't seen that before, start looking. If you're interested, you'll find it. So beyond Acton, here is where Matt Howe is from. There's more stuff down there, and it's not exactly the same. It's fresher, younger, in better shape down there, generally.
Where is Upton on that map? Because there's phenomenal stuff in Upton.
Upton State Forest. What's that called? Whitehall, Lake Whitehall? What's the reservoir? Whitehall Reservoir? Yeah, Upton's good. Although it's kind of gloomy. And just a few other odds and ends of places. Dover's got some nice stuff. Callahan State Forest has got some nice stuff. There's a place in Horse Hill in Groton's got some good stuff. The Gumpus in Pelham, New Hampshire has got great stuff. And if I don't have a lot of pictures in here, it's not because I didn't look. I did. So there's some sort of meaningful, I believe there's some meaningfulness to this. Let's look closer.
Is that map available anywhere?
No.
That you can access?
Hey, you're going to see a much better map in a second. That's the one you really want, I think. But can we just take a moment to look at this one here? This is, I tried to suppress visibility of roads because I used to not want people to know where things were. Now I've changed my mind. I think it's better if people know where things are. And with an audience who's interested in this subject, I'm sure it's completely safe to tell you. But even so, you can't tell what's where. You make the observation that why is that red dot right there? You know, it's because that's where the river starts. Now, why are the red dots right? It's because that's where the river starts. At least that's what I conclude from it, is that, and Acton is somewhere in this part. We'll take another closer look in a second. It's not really unique. It's part of a band of high density of things. And this is called the Neshoba uplift, this whole piece of geology. And water just comes out of the ground there everywhere. It's cruddy land, so it's largely unfarmed. And if you go to the highest headwaters of a brook, you'll find a cluster of rock pile sites there. It's that sort of reality that makes you think that the location of these sites is not following the agriculture. It's following some other secret of the landscape. In fact, agriculture is very heavy in here. What the hell? Can't you say, go away? Sorry, I shouldn't swear in public. This is where the farming is good, Concord. And it's not because there's no rocks over here. There are rocks over here. And there are some rocks over here. But there's just not very many rock piles over here. But it gets rockier and less farmable and more rock piles the further you get from the farming. So anybody who says farming and field clearing and rock piles, you go, yeah, but how come there's more rock piles where there's fewer farms? That doesn't make sense. So one thing after another shows you that this distribution of sites is related to the geology of the area, and it's actually counter to the farming of the area. And it suggests that high points where water is coming out of the ground were very important as some kind of, I don't know how the Native Americans think about the landscape, but for some reason they seem to, assuming that these are ancient, something to do with water coming out of the ground.
Can you just prove just a little bit of the rivers? I mean,
Okay, here's the Concord River, and here's the Sudbury and the Assabet, and this is Spencer Brook. Correct me if I'm wrong. Isn't that Spencer Brook? And this is Neshoba Brook. And I can't remember anymore. This is probably Elizabeth. Yeah, Fort Pond Brook, and I don't remember.
That's going up to the west.
Hey, I got a better map.
Where's the Esker?
Let's look at this one. This is Acton, and this is the details. This picture will be on the screen for a few minutes if anybody wants to make note of places you might want to go in Acton. I want to make a couple of comments about these things. Just things that are interesting to me. Later on, actually I was saying to Nan and Robert earlier that next to Grassy Pond, excuse me, there's this place on the backside of Grassy Pond, which is, I don't believe it's part of Acton's conservation land, and I really recommend that you go try to make it part of conservation land. It's an area of very special rock piles. This is Arlington Street, or Arlington Road here. This is that church we were talking about.
Church of the Good Shepherd.
Church of the Good Shepherd. I just wanted to point out, anybody know Brewster Cone?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, I don't know him, but I'm told that this is his land, and you will eventually find that there's quite a lot of stuff over there. But I want to point to that dot right there, because that's a bigger mound. And I'm going to spend part of tonight talking about larger mounds. So while it's up, just comment that there's a larger mound there. There's a larger mound on top of Strawberry Hill, right there, right next to the trail. Just look around. Okay, and that's one of the places that the trail could take a little divergence. And there are probably some larger mounds over here. I don't know why I didn't record them. But Acton doesn't actually have that many of the larger mounds, which I'm going to be talking about for a few minutes. Does anybody want to ask about any of the places there while it's on the screen?
Where can we get some of these good, better maps from?
Well, these are secret.
Huh?
These are secret. They're not for sale. I don't know. It's not published. You're seeing it for the first time. It's not a commercial product. How much are you offering?
Has somebody got their phone camera?
Could you please point to the Spring Hill?
Yes, good point. I think Spring Hill is right there. This is
What is that? I'm sorry.
This is Spring Hill Road, and you walk up the trail and get to the grid. You ignore the fact that behind Bob Callahan's house there's a different collection of things. You ignore the fact that over on Triangle Farm Road there's a collection of things. You are able now to go to the corner of Pope Road and, what's that called? West Street? And there's a nice collection of things there. The town of Carlisle made a big deal about parcel C, was it, of Mr. Benfield, because they found Indian stuff back there. The top of Nagog Hill really is Rockpile Central. You can just drive up over that hill, and at the crest there's a house with a box made out of, looks like a tin foil.
Yeah.
To the right, if you're looking at the house, that's a very nice, interesting area, but it belongs to the house, and it should belong to the town, if you, just as a thought. So now I'm going to talk about some other part of Beyond Acton, which is that when I started looking at this stuff, Linda McElroy, I was speaking to her. Does everybody know who Linda McElroy is? She's one of the land steward, Trail Through Time officials for the town of Concord. Called me up where I was talking to her, and she said, you know, I heard about this guy named Jick Davis in Carlisle who's got some jade in the woods. He's interested in rocks. He's got jade. And I thought, jade? I got to meet this guy. So it was interesting because I went to meet Jick Davis, who's standing at the back of the room there. And I wanted to see the jade. And we went and looked at the jade. And there really is something that's a good deal like jade in the rocks right there. But as we left and walked back, I knew the place because 2 weekends before I had surveyed it with my son and found rock piles there. So I stopped as we went back and I said to him, what do you think of that? And he said, well, farmers put that there. And I said, well, why would they do this? Because it was a stone propped up with rocks underneath it. And it was like, he goes, because, and sort of stopped, and then the wheels started turning. And Chick, if I say this wrong, I apologize, you can correct me. But a couple days later, he called me up and said, you know, this stuff's all over the place. My wife found this thing that looks just like a naked woman on the rocks, and there's another thing over here, and it's everywhere. It's really interesting. So we went out and we walked around, and I want to say that many of my explorations have been with Chick Davis, and he's got incredibly sharp eyes, and he sees things that nobody else sees, and I've benefited from that. But the reason I want to mention Chick tonight is because he was interested in protecting the land. And when I showed him that there was, we've got some stuff up here, I think it's Native American. We need you to come look at it. So the Native Americans came to Carlisle, the tribal elders, not sure, I wasn't there. They walked around and said, yes, this is our stuff. Now this is important because they've always denied that this stuff was theirs. And the reasons for them denying it lie in the history of the, you could kill an Indian if he expressed a religious, non-Christian belief. They're just fair game. They weren't worth anything as slaves. They were vermin. So you just kill them if you didn't like them. They weren't real anxious to tell people what they were up to. And in the course of time, it appears that they lost these sites. They lost the knowledge of them. They forgot where they were. I believe that they've lost most of the underlying theories of those grids. I don't think that those are understood. I think that they're reconstructing and preserving things down in Rhode Island. Some of the reasons there's a fresh in Parker Woodland is because people are maintaining those sites. But I don't think it's because they necessarily understand all the theory of it. And the past is a long time. And as I look through Acton, I see one style after another style after another style. I have no reason to believe that it was just one group of people. We've got hundreds of years, perhaps thousands of years of different people coming here doing stuff. They all buried their dead. Every one of them. This is a picture of Doug Harris, who's married to the daughter of the medicine man, the princess of the Narragansett. He was the representative that became the voice of the Native Americans. He came up to Carlisle. He and I took several walks together, talked about what was around, and he got very excited. And so he went to the Congress of the Eastern Native American Tribes and said, we've got this stuff. We've got this stuff. You guys need to help us protect it. So they came out with some things called the USET resolutions. USET stands for United South and Eastern Tribes. And they proclaimed into law that there existed rock piles and there's a sacred landscape here, and it's our duty to work with the towns to try to preserve these. There were other resolutions, but these represent an important historic moment when the Indians stopped being afraid to admit that they'd done things on the landscape. And it creates a context for rock piles that's been missing, which is that the people who were associated with their building are okay with this. They say, yeah, that's right. We didn't want to tell you, but now that you figured it out, that's right. You can look up USET if you wish. USET resolution, I can't see the number. So now I'm going to spend some time talking about my passion, which is mounds with hollows and tails. And I'll try to tell you how the story of that came about, a little bit more like a story and less like a list of facts or suppositions. And it starts again with Chick Davis. Well, I should say that I've been walking around looking at rock piles from here to Leominster, down to Upton, over to New Hampshire. And I had become aware of the fact that a lot of times you see a rock pile with a hole in the middle. A lot of times. Over and over and over again, there's a hole in the middle. I'll show you pictures in a second. And I was puzzling, what is, because I'm always going to the tops of the hills looking for springs on the hills. But it turns out that if you go looking in swamps, there's a whole different demographic of rock piles that you find at the edge of lakes. And see if I can make some sense out of this picture. That's Chick. There's a square rock pile, there's side, 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 and a straight thing coming down here like the number 9 maybe, straight wall. So this, I'll call this the tail on the rock pile. But what Chick is pointing to is the hollow. which is at the other end of the rock pile. And please bear with me and just spend a moment looking at that, okay? Because that's the hole in the rock pile. And I can tell you that there's no loose rocks that have been thrown out of the way. These walls are carefully built. This is square. That hole was there when the rock pile was created. That hole is part of the rock pile. No, so I want to say that I was puzzled and troubled over what was the hole for, why was there a hole in so many rock piles. I started at this point to come to the conclusion that it's part of the rock pile. It's not something that happened. Another possibility which was suggested was that people came along afterwards and dug a little crater for themselves to sit in. It's called a thunderbird nest. And that's a Native Americans trying to interpret these things, because the words came out of the mouth of an elder who was being asked about something that he didn't understand. And he was looking at one of these and said, yeah, that's where we had, it's a thunderbird nest. Well, no, this was built with the rock. I don't know how to pluralize that. 2 ponds connected by a brook. And I was going to go walk around the pond looking for these things, but the sound of gunfire in that direction discouraged me. So instead, I just walked down the road, which crosses the brook between the ponds, and I looked to the side of the road and, gee, what was that? And you can't tell from this picture, but it was a rock pile with a curved tail and a hollow in it. And so I thought it was pretty good that I could drive 40 miles across the landscape looking for something, know where to look, step out of the car, and there it was. You can't believe me from this picture, but bear with me. Here we are on right off of West Ashby Road in Fitchburg. We just crossed Falula Brook. Falula Brook, there's my car, there's the bridge across Falula Brook. There's my wife. And look carefully here. There's rock, there's no rock here. Rock goes around and then comes in here like that. The hollow or the hole in the rock pile here is sort of off center, and it's part of the tail. So it's really like curling around this hole. It's a pretty little thing, and it's identical to something at Wright's Pond. And so I got to show you a couple pictures of these things. We are on a slope here, okay? So this is level. And so what you're looking at is a hole in the middle of a rock pile that's collapsed in. So it slopes like that, rock pile's built against it, and all the interior of it's missing. You're starting to get the sense of at least what I mean when I say the hole in the rock pile, the hollow in the middle of the rock pile. The interpretation is hovering near. Why would a rock pile have a hole in it? This one's shaped a bit like a pyramid. It's a rectangular pyramid. It's got some disruption here, but it's basically a 4-sided truncated cone. Let's look carefully at the top of the truncated cone. I see 2 holes there. Is that visible? I have some 3D pictures of this. It really makes it clear. But here we've got this rectangular pyramid with holes in the top. We just saw a very similar hole off of this thing in Carlisle. This one's in Westminster. It's a long way away. That's quite a pile of rocks, right? We don't have anything like that in Acton that I know of. There's the hole in the middle of that one. Okay? What happened here? I guess my formatting went crazy. That's a rock pile with a hole in the middle of it. That one's in New Brunswick, Maine. Now, I guess I might as well tell you. What happened here is that it collapsed inward. Probably. There's a nice one. Guess where that one is?
Westminster.
No, Lexington. Who knew? And by the way, there's nothing like this in Europe at all. Well, unless you count the Danish burial mounds. There's nothing like that. Nobody cleared a field in Europe like that. Why would they come to Lexington and start clearing fields like the ancient Danes? Let's take a look at the top of this one. What do you got? A little crater. See a little crater there. These things have all had an emptiness in the middle that collapsed. That's what happened. Why would they have an emptiness in the middle? Now there's different kinds of things with holes in them. This one's in Callahan State Forest and has 2 holes. Is that a fair way to describe that, would you say?
Have they ever dug down into these holes to see if there was anything in them?
In Georgia they have. Nothing, thankfully. Because if they found gold, then that would be the end of this subject.
No, it could have been, fire residue.
They do find occasionally things like turkey bones and deer bones and odds and ends.
And Tabor and Dix did some that were going to be destroyed, remember? And
Right, they found more
they found that there was
red
structure
ochre
underground.
in one little rock pile than someone else had found in this entire season of exploring an archaeological site. The thing was packed with red ochre. That's what I remember, the Freetown excavation.
No other artifacts.
Right, right. And in Georgia, they say the same thing. Just, there don't seem to be any artifacts. And that, for them, is a defect of this subject. It's like, there's no arrowheads there. We can't date these things.
Georgia, they did date it. I think back maybe 1,200, something like that. There were a few that they were able to date. Near the Trap Rock Dams.
As I sense an audience that's more accepting of these ideas, I'm more willing to just speak freely about them, which is, okay, we're looking at a burial mound of a particular style here, and that's a pretty old one. It's not up in your face. It's kind of fallen down. And it's a different style from many of the others. This is a double-chambered mound, okay? Here they are looming in the distance. The one on the left is from, you know where, it's across from Henry's Hill. I know you've been there, Peter.
So you're saying, you're running the theory that it's a burial mound?
Yeah.
Can I put out another theory?
Pardon me?
Can I put out another theory?
Sure.
Yeah, so,
As long as we don't have a debate.
well, we can just let it drop at whatever point. You know, Native Americans were into sweat lodges, and so they had this whole practice of people doing an inward journey. And one of the things that's found in pyramids and a lot of secret sites in Europe are these chambers that were formerly thought of as burial, but they never have bones in them. And they were actually used as a kind of religious thing for, you know, a kind of resurrection.
I actually kind of believe you. I kind of agree, because these are open-topped, and it's quite possible that the remains were removed. But I do believe that people
But I'm talking about for like a special kind of meditation or purification. You know, that you would go
Well,
there and fast. And,
none of that is in evidence. Okay, all I see is a hole.
but what I'm saying is that that's a common pre-Christian thing at sacred sites in other places, and it's also consistent with Native American approach.
Okay, I'm not sure what to say. I do believe that these locations were important. I'm not sure there really was a body in there, but I can say.
No, a live person. I'm not talking about a body. I'm talking about a person who's in
So
a
sweat
crisis
lodges.
would
Okay,
go on a
but let me
retreat.
just take on sweat lodges for a second.
Like a sweat
We do find sweat lodges. They're next to brooks. They're open to the brook, and I would entertain more easily the idea that these were sweat lodges had we not already found sweat lodges, and they're quite different from this. They're by the brook. This is up on a hill, no water in sight. So.
Right, I'm not talking about a sweat lodge.
Okay, anyway, I'm going to continue. But yeah, I do believe that these things have spiritual significance. But at the moment, I'm just trying to show you that they're big. Their shape is not, this is not the way it looks if you dump rocks out of a cart. And if you dump them out of a cart, they go like that. This is built up like so, and then it's settled a bit. Mount Elam in Leominster is covered with these things. It's the Manitou Hills, if you're familiar with them. This is the sort of the little hill that's not called big, tall. And you have to really be in love with this idea to see it here. But there's not so many rocks here or here, but there's rock here and here and here. This is actually the same shape as that. It's an 8 or a square 8 shape. but it's completely fallen in, completely gone, and stylistically very different from some of the other things I've been showing you. These aren't all one people, but what I find interesting is that the fresher ones are bigger, and that the fresher ones, which have one or two holes in the top, usually are next to a long, big one that's got a big hole and a big hole. It makes you think that in the old days, people were buried. This is complete speculation, but it makes me think that people were buried informally in little family groups back then, and then over time it became more hierarchical, and the big honcho got the big pile, and all of his servants got dumped over there. There are real differences in the style that follow the degree of degeneration of the thing. So, back to Acton. This is the top of Strawberry Hill. We're standing on the trail. We look to the left, and you see that. By the way, there's a house. This is somebody's dead Christmas tree. So we're not far from the houses. All right. Fills the rectangle, the empty spot does. Sometimes it's a small little part of the top of it. We saw this picture earlier, a curved berm of rocks. It's in the same family of ideas. It's a thing shaped like that, which, you know, turn it around a little bit. It's a rock pile around an empty spot. I decided, I think this is the nicest rock pile at Acton. It's my opinion. It's the prettiest rock pile in Acton. And so you should make that trail through time, take a left.
Where is that?
If you go to the end of Wheeler Lane and you cross the brook, and the yellow spot trail goes down the right, if instead you cut off to the left where there is no trail, you will pass split-wedged rocks, and then you get up to the brow of the hill, and then you will run into some Boy Scout fireplaces, and if you poke around in there, you'll see that. It's a marvelous. We've seen it twice, Chick and I have. It's a different culture than the ones that were building these big tall mounds. So Briar Hill Road, is that the correct name? The back of that development?
The North Briar development could be correct. This is near Wheeler Lane.
This is, this is west of Wheeler Lane, right off of 2A, behind the Pizza Hut, back in there.
Davis Road. That's another access to the trail through time.
Right. This is between Davis Road and Spring Hill. It's halfway in between. And there's a little cluster of these old things with holes in them in the woods there, and they're very hard to spot. And but someday I hope that the trail through time gets to those, because to me those are very significant, interesting, and different from some of the other sites that are in Acton. To me, it's, you know, if you just see a rock pile that's knocked over, you can't say it's older than that rock pile because that rock pile wasn't knocked over. You can't say that because it could have had different circumstances knocked that one over. But if you see a certain style of rock pile that's been knocked over more than another style of rock pile, statistically speaking, you could say these ones are usually more knocked over than those ones. In which case you could say these must be chronologically older than those. That's the logic of it. So this hasn't been knocked over. I have a question. How deep down does it go? I have no idea. Maybe we're just seeing the top of it. Maybe it never was very big anyway. To me, they're very intriguing. They're much more interesting and curious. They're a mystery. They're much more of a puzzle than the grid, which now is beginning to seem sort of familiar and commonsensical. And I just want to mention, how's my time? I just want to mention that the Brewster Cone land has another one of these big ones with a hole in it, in addition to the stuff along Route 27. And that's all I've got. Thank you very much.